Hey everyone, welcome to Shiloh Ranch Church. At Shiloh Ranch, we have a lot of activities constantly going on. We have what's called the 1017 Project, which supplies food to families in need. We have the Firewood Project in the winter, which supplies firewood to families in need. We have amazing worship and scripture-based sermons every single Sunday, and we have an awesome team that you will get to meet along the way. But without further ado, let's head into the service.
Good morning, Shiloh Ranch Church Online.
Hello,
I've got
Shiloh Ranch Online.
Jordan here with me today.
I've got Jacob here with me today.
We've got a new website.
We do.
It went live.
Yep, it's awesome. If you haven't,
Yeah, it looks nice, new, fresh. You can watch the live stream on there too, I think.
yeah,
Last week I tried and it.
Yeah, no, it's definitely guaranteed to work this week.
It's guaranteed to. I'll try.
Or my name's not Jacob McLean.
So we got that. Today we're going into worship right after this. Then we'll be back here to talk about the sermon.
Yep.
And then worship again. And then we'll sign it off.
Yeah.
Simple week.
Hate to give away a surprise, but be looking, in the next coming months. I know there's some ideas on how to change some of the live stream stuff with Joe coming in. And so we're excited to see how this platform's going to look. So if you were part of Shiloh Ranch Online, be ready. I think it's going to even get better.
Oh, yeah. No, for sure. Actually, it's going to be cool. I'm excited for it. So let's go into worship right now.
Like the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit come over us. Oh, come and rest on us. Come and rest on us. Like the Spirit was moving over the water, Spirit come over us. this room. Wherever we are, worshiping you, would you fill the room? We're grateful for this opportunity to worship you. God, we just ask that the Spirit would move over us. Like the Spirit was moving over the waters. Spirit, come move over us. We love you. We're grateful for your love and your presence. Amen.
We are back, and we're about to go into the sermon.
Yep. I think it's this to me is what makes the most sense about online, because if the teaching is informational, like I know that human interaction has become super important. It seems like people coming out of COVID, what they want is like face-to-face again. They want to be in contact with people. They want to be around people again. And I'm loving that. I'm loving the church is moving back to a more personal, in-person type of an experience. But the word, what's cool about the word is whether you hear it, whether you listen to it, whether you read it, whatever the case may be, this is useful regardless of the platform. So
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. The sermon after this and this whole service will be live on YouTube, as well as the website, and so on. If you,
all electronic platforms.
yeah, if you want to watch it again or send it to a friend.
If you catch us on the street, you can just ask us to perform it for you.
Yeah,
in case
we'll
you
do it
missed
right there.
Right there. I've preached a few sermons at the Powell Butte store.
Yeah, free of charge.
Yep.
Except for the fee of there's a setup fee in this whole thing. No,
just
we're
sign.
joking.
Just sign it. It's
Just
not
sign it. You don't have to. No, we're joking.
What is it? What is it they said? If you want to know what's in the bill, you have to sign it first.
We're going into worship right after the sermon.
Yep.
So worship along with us, and then we'll be back to sign you guys off after that. So see you then.
Welcome. Okay, so we're starting a 2-week series. And so if you see, like, wait a minute, I think he preached in that exact same outfit 2 weeks ago. Hold on. We're recording them both today. Don't worry. I have actually 2 shirts. Since the third week in December, the week before Christmas, I feel like there's been sort of this concept bouncing around in my head. I had read this story and I knew that there was something there. Actually, if I'm being honest, I can go back a few years and I read this exact same story and I knew there was something there, but it wasn't as strong. It just sort of gets put away. It was in my notes, in my phone, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. And so then I read it again in December, and it's almost like, if you haven't ever spoke, I guess I'll do the best I can to explain it, but just it's hard to describe. But it's almost like it's a concept that you can smell. You can kind of smell it, but you can't put it into a shape that makes sense yet. Sometimes it's like you can smell an idea before you can see it. Lesson 1 for all you people that intend to speak in front of people: don't try to preach on a topic before it's ready. I think I've been a part of sermons where people were preaching something before it was quite ready in their mind. I know for a fact that I've preached on stuff before it was ready. And so I'm excited. Actually, this week, it feels like it kind of all like clears up a little bit. Ezekiel 37, everything I just said is about to make a lot more sense. Ezekiel 37, verse 1, the hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, how can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Verse 4, then he said to me, prophesy to these bones and say to them, dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. If you're just joining, if you got in here, this is a vision that Ezekiel's having. This is not something that's happening in the physical. This is God showing Ezekiel his vision. Verse 7, so I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling noise, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Remember, the reverse was true. When God said what he's going to do, he started with the breath and worked back to the bones. Now they're starting at the bones. There's a formation here. I don't know how far into it we'll get. Just know the way that this is written is very creative. This is not haphazard, throwing it together. This is a constructed story. This is an intentionally constructed story. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. It's kind of a creepy story, to be honest. There's this army of assembled bodies, no life. Then he said to me, prophesy to the breath, prophesy, son of man, and say it. This is what the sovereign Lord says, come, breath from the four winds, and breathe into these slain so that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. He goes on to talk about restoring Israel. Lesson 2. Do not risk preaching the most Halloween story in the Bible if you're not ready. I knew I wanted to go through this story. I knew there was something there. And this is what's so interesting to me, is I think sometimes we get used to coming to church or we listen to a sermon. Monologues are hard. I struggle to keep my attention on one person talking, and so there's the challenge. But here's what I hope. I hope that in the next few minutes, just in the course of this sermon, something about this story can be applied to your life in a way that genuinely changes the way that life goes for you. I think that would be great. I think that would be the best goal we could hope, is that by God showing Ezekiel this story, by Ezekiel recording it, by the Bible telling it to us in a way that we can apply, there's good to be had here. Let's look past the creepiness. Let's look past the sort of zombie element that is so obviously at the surface, and let's look below that. This is a story. And in the Bible, the thing I love about stories is there's something to pull out of it. When you look at this story, as off-putting as it is, there's something about the truth, or something's happening there to derive or to pull out of the story. The reason, let's see if this makes sense. The reason this story is creepy is because death in this story is moving the wrong direction. As much as we don't like death or thinking about death or talking about death, we're aware of death. We know that death exists, and there's a certain level of comfort that we have with death because it moves one direction. You go from life to death, and then that's it. But in this story, in this vision of Ezekiel, death is moving the wrong direction. You're seeing a valley of dry bones, and all of a sudden the bones begin to rattle, and God draws them back together. If you've never heard T.D. Jakes teach on this story, it is amazing. It's an amazing teaching. But the bones begin to rattle and start to move back. Death is going the wrong way. Death is moving the wrong direction. And we already don't like death, but we especially don't like death when it's doing something unpredictable. This story talks about death in reverse. It talks about death, restoration, life, and purpose. Death, restoration, life, purpose. That is absolutely backwards. 4 points. If you're taking notes, if you're going to write down notes to try to remember what we went over today, if for some reason if you're able to take something out of today and put it into practice, here's how I'll organize it. It's in 4 different points. First point, the Alpha and Omega theory. The entire Bible is written through an Alpha and Omega theory. What that means is this. The description of Alpha and Omega theory is that the end was written in mind all the way backwards to the beginning. From the entire Bible, Jesus, the cross, the resurrection, the way that it would go, the Revelation stuff that we still can't fully understand, all of that was already in place. The end was in place throughout the whole story. It's like if this was a comedy, it's called a callback. You reference something that was funny and you're like, oh, that's what that was. It was, the end was already in mind. It was already scripted throughout the whole story. The entire Bible is written in the Alpha and Omega theory. I look at Matthew chapter 16, verse 21. There's 3 of these. I'm only going to read one for the sake of time. 3 places where Jesus specifically talks about his death on the cross. 3 times, Jesus tells them in plain terms. You'd think if Jesus told you, you'd get it. They didn't. Okay. Matthew chapter 16, 21. From that time, Jesus began to explain to his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things at the hands of the elders, the chief priests, and the teachers of the law, and that he must be killed on the 3rd day to be raised to life. So it's not like sometimes Jesus talking in parables and they're like, oh, I don't get that. I wonder what that one's going to mean. It says he's full on explaining it fully. The end was already established as he's teaching. They're like, I wonder what that means. He'll be killed and raised the 3rd day. That means exactly that. Mark 9, 30 through 32 is another one. Mark 10, 32 through 34. There are 3 specific places where Jesus spells out his death, the end from the beginning. But even more so, you go all the way back to Genesis, first chapter in the entire book in the entire Bible. Genesis 22, 1 through 19 talks about Abraham taking Isaac to the top of the mountain. It's the son, and the son is carrying wood. Where have we seen this in the story of Jesus? The son is carrying wood to the top of a mountain. You know, Jesus, the crucifixion was on the hill of Golgotha. And so you see it all the way back in the first book, and it says that he's walking up to be a sacrifice. And here's what's crazy. We hear this, and we're like, oh, that seems kind of gross and off-putting. In the day, false gods would ask for child sacrifices all the time. It didn't stand out as unique. What stood out as unique is that God spares him at the end and provides a sacrifice. There is so much of the end that's already in place and is scattered throughout the entire Bible. The end, the death and resurrection already in place all the way back generations, thousands of years earlier. In that story, God spares Abraham's son. In the story of Jesus, he doesn't spare his own son. The cross and the resurrection guaranteed, think of it this way. The cross and the resurrection guaranteed that Jesus moved through his ministry with purpose and mission. That because he knew the end, it dictated his daily decision-making. That to say this whole point, the whole sermon so far has been a setup for this moment right here. This is where this concept went from like kind of a smell, like I kind of get it, I kind of understand it. I read the title. I listened to the sermon or the podcast out of respect. I felt like I should because the title was so meaningful. But really, the title of the podcast is what explained it. Donald Miller has a podcast, and the title was "Start by Writing Your Eulogy Now." Instantly, I'm like, that's what I've been trying to. That's it. Like and like I said, I listened to the podcast, and it's okay podcast, but the title was "Write Your Eulogy Now." Imagine what your eulogy would hold. And you go back to Ezekiel 37, and remember, it's a vision. There are things that we're supposed to derive out of the story of these bones rattling back together, but this kind of stuff, from death back to life, out of curiosity, I put a list of things together as I'm going through in my mind of like what I hope people say at my eulogy, and you're thinking about it. I had to start. I couldn't clarify what I wanted people to say until I was sure of what I wanted them not to say. If you're going to sit down, you're going to write your own eulogy. If you're going to think about your life from the end back to the beginning, like we're aware of death, we know what's going to happen. And so if we were to sit down and really conceptualize what things do I want to be true about my life when it's over? When it's the end, when I'm the valley of dry bones, what do I want people to say about me? What legacy do I want to leave? Here's what I would not want said at my eulogy. Jordan Weaver, he made his wife sad a lot. That would be like the opposite of what I want to be true. That my life was a burden to the person that I loved the most. What about this one? He's a good guy, but his kids didn't like him. He did a lot of good, or, he accomplished a lot, or man, he sure made a lot of money in his life. Whatever sort of goals you have. I mean, what if your kids don't like you? That's a giant monumental thing. Jordan Weaver, man, that guy was a bad friend. He's flaky, self-centered, hypocritical. I mean, pretty soon what happens, and I'm not saying I don't think backwards, I'm sure that I do, but when you start to conceptualize things that you don't want to be true, pretty soon you start feeling like that valley of dry bones. I think of Ezekiel in terms of like, once my life is over, it's almost like, mentally or spiritually, it's like you get to go to that day, the day of your funeral, and you get to almost walk through the valley of death of your own life and go, well, what do I want to be true in that moment? You don't get to fix anything at that moment. That's what's weird to me is every day I feel like I can fix that. I can make that better. I can improve on that. I can work on that. I can tinker with that. When you go to your own funeral in your own mind, if you start thinking of like the valley of dry bones in your own life, there's a finality to it that you can't fix. Like if you haven't fixed it by then, that's it. You don't get to correct anything at that point. You don't get to go back and change anything at that point. If you start there, what you realize is, I don't have the ability to change things at that point. Here's some things I didn't write. I actually Googled, like, what do you not say in a eulogy, just out of curiosity. And they're like, don't talk about past screw-ups. We don't want to talk about those. Don't talk about, like, character flaws, like some of the obvious ones. Here's some things that didn't make it. And I'm not even done. To be honest, I'm not even finished with mine. It's just such an interesting concept. I think there's so much value in looking at the story of bones being brought back to life, being breathed life. Like that is this. That to me is this. Here's some things that I didn't consider as I'm putting together what I want to be true of my life when it's over. Nothing about comparison. I've never been to a funeral where they go, he's a nice guy, but wasn't as nice as Bill. Oh, he's a good guy, but wasn't as good a guy as Jim. Like, you see what I mean? Like, comparison exists in my life on a daily basis. I struggle if I'm not careful with comparison. Am I doing this? Am I doing that? Am I better or worse? Comparison gets such a foothold in my daily life. But if I fast forward to my funeral, it doesn't get a foothold at all. So why am I giving comparison such a prevalent role in my life today if I don't want it to be present when it's over, right? Personal goals, future plans, there are things that once your life is over, don't make sense to focus on. For instance, Jordan, he really wanted to, build this thing, but now he's dead. Why would you even mention that? If I never got to it, if I never got to the thing, like future goals and planning and like accomplishment takes a big part of my life in my day-to-day life, serves no purpose in my funeral. I'm fine. I've just been talking a lot today. Verse 2, let's look at that again. It says, he led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. I think we're okay with the idea of things ending, but then we want separation from it. I mean, that's why we bury bodies. If something fails, then we walk away from it. If something's dead, we walk away from it. And it says that God is bringing Ezekiel back into death, and in death, asking him to consider life. It's a backwards approach. In this vision, you're like, God is bringing Ezekiel, almost reversing the timeline, like the timeline in reverse. Here's what I know. When you start considering life from the end backwards, you will instantly, if you're like me, you will instantly begin to face regret. There will instantly be things that like, oh man, I wish I would have done that differently. I wish I would have started this earlier. There's some things in parenting all of a sudden that I'm learning, like in this last year, that I'm going, oh, I wish I would have known that sooner. You will face regret when you start to recap, when you start to walk through the valley of what it's going to be like when your life is over, the legacy that you're going to leave, what it's going to be like when you're gone. You're going to have to work through regret. Here's the third point. Face death. There's no way around it. I know there's like, I don't want to think about it. I don't want to talk about it. But when you face death, you're given the opportunity to start writing your life. Third point, when you face your death and you realize it's inevitable, it's going to happen, it gives you the freedom to then start writing the story between now and then. You get to start reauthoring vision and purpose and direction and all the things that are important, but you got to consider the end in mind. Mark 16, verse 2, it says, very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb. They asked each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? You're like, okay, I know this story. I've heard this story before. But when they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Why? Because when death happens, that's it. We are not used to the concept of death to restoration. We think of death as being the final. That's the end. We think of death. The reason we don't like thinking about death is because there's nothing past that. It's like death, the end, right? They go to see Jesus. Jesus had told them death, resurrection, and they hadn't grasped it, that death was the end. Don't be alarmed. He said, you're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter. There's a reason he says Peter. Why? Because Peter had already accepted. We're going to get to that next week. He is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him just as he told you. This is an interesting response. Because Jesus said, I'm going to die, I'm going to be raised again, I'm the Son of God, I'm going to bring forgiveness, I'm going to put life beyond death, I'm going to give you life beyond death, I'm going to let you think of death not as the end, but as a transition. And so when they hear that Jesus is raised from the dead, instead of going like, yes, we did it, he did it, we're great, we're good, listen to their reaction. Trembling and bewildered, the women went out and fled from the tomb. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. See, when you think about the vision of walking through the valley of dry bones and the bones starting to rattle and moving back into bodies and becoming this army and assembling, there is something very distressing. For being honest, there's something very distressing about the idea of interacting with death when death is moving the wrong direction. Jesus goes, I'm going to be raised from the dead. It's going to prove who I am, and it's going to be amazing, and I'm going to save all mankind. He does it, and they're like, oh. I love that in my life, the Bible doesn't end at the end. That it goes through this transition of death into new life. Now, I don't just mean that as a physical sense. I mean, we think of like a physical death as being the end. The Bible talks about a physical death being a spiritual transition. I get that. But I also think this. I think if we would allow it, I think the Alpha Omega theory that the Bible goes through, I think would be a huge advantage in our personal day-to-day lives, in the way that we live our lives, in the way that we parent, in the way that we interact with people in our families. I think that life after death, or death and then back to restoration and forgiveness and all the things that the Bible talks about, is useful now. There's a practical usefulness to the idea of considering death, going there, looking at it, and then getting to work on the story between now and then. I almost think of it this way. You know, one of the things they say about animals that separates animals from humans is that people have a sense of their own death. We know, we're aware that we're going to die. Some of us think about it more than others. But I think it's an advantage. I think knowing that this ride that we're on ends at some point is an advantage, but it's got to be intentional. We can either avoid it altogether, or we can look at it. We can walk through the valley of dry bones and go, God, what can you do with this? What's possible? I mean, I walk through my death. I walk through the end of my life, and I think back and I go, okay, God, what can you do with the story as it is today? Verse 7 says, so I prophesied as I was commanded. Actually, he says, can these bones come back to life? And Ezekiel, being a smart guy, he's like, only you would know. I mean, obviously, this feels like a setup. He's not going to be like, I don't know. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and I was prophesying. There was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. I think this is a very specific order. I don't think this order is listed. It doesn't say it just all happened all at once. It says there was a process. There was this bringing back the pieces, putting the pieces back together, and then, verse 10, then it says this. So I prophesied as he commanded, and breath entered them, and they came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. I think sometimes we get so determined, God, please fix me. Fix me in the condition that I'm in. I've messed everything up. I've made so many mistakes. I've made a mess of my life. You know, I've battled through addiction. I've ruined relationships. I've started and not finished. All these things that we do. Oh, God, just fix me, make me better. But this is different. This is not saying, God, take my life and make it more life. It says, I'm accepting that death happened in this story. The death that I tried so hard to avoid happened. And you're not fixing me. You're restoring me. We think of fixing as moving forward. Fix me before I die. This is saying, no, the death and then restoration, I'm bringing things back together in a way that only God can. I'm bringing things back into life. And the only way that this works is if God breathes life back into it. I don't think the order of that is unimportant. Here's one of my goals. I'm just going to tell you guys, and then as you're working on it, make your own list. But here's the number one thing on my list. Here's the number one thing I hope people say was true in my life. Now, keep in mind, I'm saying this as a goal. Like between now and whenever God takes me home, this is a goal I've got between now and then to work on. I want to be the most loved by the people who knew me the best. I want the people who knew me the best, Lacey, Jet, Cody, and then out from there. I want those three people to get my best. I know that I want that to be true. I want, when I'm gone, I want that to be something that was true about my life. So that means now today, I have some reordering. I have some reprioritizing. There's some things that I'm going to have to set down. I know that comparison is active in my life, but won't be active in my death. And so I need to address that. I want to be loved by the people that knew me the best. That means I have to start setting other things down. Do you see the advantage of what I'm talking about? It's like God is letting us in our minds. If you're a human, you're aware that your own death is going to happen. And an advantage of that is you go there and then you start working your way back. And it's like the reality of death starts to create life. Where have you heard that before? Death, new life. Death, different life. There is a practical, logical usefulness to the acceptance of impending death and the life that can be lived between now and then. We beg God to fix us, and his desire is to restore us. Here's the last one. I listen to the story of death, restoration, life, and purpose, and I go, okay, well, how could that be true in my own life? How could I live in a way that reflects Ezekiel 37? Because the focus of Ezekiel 37 was not the death. It was the life on the other side of death. I think about my own life, and I think, okay, there are so many things I hold on to and I grasp trying to stay alive. And I don't mean in a physical sense. I mean the life that I would get myself into if I cling too tightly to things. I think about the cross. You know, it's we've talked about this so much, but the intersection of mercy and justice, and that from that, because Jesus laid down his life, the death that happened and the resurrection, and that it's a million of those over and over and over again in my life, that I think of what life God's got for me. It starts with the acceptance of death. That there are going to be things in my life that I have to let die, but the focus is not the death. The focus is the life that gets brought back together on the backside of that. I was talking to my uncle last weekend. I was in Houston, and he said that, you know, God gives us just these basic instructions. You know, the Pharisees had turned it into 600 and something laws. You have to do this, you have to do this, and the best you could hope for is that you die. And they go, he was a good rule follower. I've heard a quote that says, the road to hell is paved with commandment followers who thought they were doing it and didn't need Jesus. So if I go to this story and I go, God, what does it look like for the dry bones area of my life? If I could start seeing life brought back together, here's what I think we settle on, some variation of this, some version of this. Here's what I would encourage you with. You're going to have to do your own homework. This is a little bit of a different kind of a sermon because it has like sort of a how-to taste that I generally try to avoid, but just if on the day of my funeral, the people who knew me the best could say and mean that I love the Lord, that God was at work in my life and it was a visible change, like you could see visible growth because I love the Lord, that's an achievement. That's something worth clinging to. The second thing is he loved people. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength. Soul and strength, I'm not quoting it exactly. Love your neighbor as yourself. There's two things in there. It means I'm supposed to love my neighbor. It also means I'm supposed to love myself. That is perfect balance. I think that that's the most perfect summation. If at the end of my life, somebody could say and mean he loved the Lord and it was visible because he was constantly changing and looking more like Jesus. And secondly, he loved people, even at the expense of himself. If that's true, then I start working back and I go, in what ways does my life not reflect that today? In what ways could I be more intentional to say, if that's what I want to be true, am I spending time with the Lord or am I spending time in chaos and worry and panic and comparison and all these things that tend to creep in? Who's the most loved by the people who knew him the best? Am I giving them the best of my time? I can't tell you how many pastors I've known felt called on this mission. Got to build a church. I got to be in the ministry. I'm out here on a mission. I am saving souls. It's a great mission. It's well intended. And there's just this wake of broken, sad, wounded people that follow because they feel like that the mission of ministry outweighs the mission of people. And I'm almost, in a sense, I'm almost grateful to have seen that, because as I think about the end of my life, it gives me something to avoid. It gives me something to work against. I hope that helps explain a little bit of the season I'm in right now that says, hey, I want Shiloh to do well and I want to do a good job, but really my highest priority is I want to love the Lord. I want to love people, starting with the people that I'm closest to. If those things are true, I will see bones start coming back together in my life. I'll see restoration start coming back into my life. I'm going to see life start coming back into my life. It gives God the permission from me, the full permission to go, God, breathe life back into the things that matter and breathe death into the things that are unimportant. Kill the comparison. Kill the self-preservation that I'm so prone to. Kill the self-isolating. I have a list of priorities that get me closer to what I want it to look like in the end. I don't think there's anybody that couldn't benefit from the Alpha Omega, the same way that the Bible's written. I think in the same way that it's macro, it breaks down into the micro. That when we start to write our own eulogy, when we walk through the valley of dry bones and we consider that one day it's going to be over, what do we want to be true then? And we get to work on how to approach that and how to try to conceive that today. It's changing today based on looking at tomorrow. It's working from death back to restoration, to life, and to purpose. Ooh, don't you like this? This is as I continue to close, I closed my computer early. I should give everybody a false hope. I think every other outlet in the world that you look at says, we'll make your life better. We'll help make your life. Here's how you make your life better. Here's how to make things better. I love what Jesus says about accept the death. Whew. And from death, restoration and life. It's not the preserving of your own life. It's the surrender of your own life so that in the end, it looks more like love the Lord, love each other. Let's pray. Lord, if this is true, it means that death isn't a disqualifier. God, it means it's an advantage. We can consider that death in the long run could be an advantage if we use it to begin shaping our lives today. Selflessness, giving, purpose, God, that we put priority on the people that are closest to us. We start stepping back from the manic that comes when we pursue all of the things that won't matter in the end. God, it's interesting. It's so fascinating to me. I pray that it makes sense, but it's so fascinating when we look at the end, how much of our day is spent on things that won't matter. Not 1 minute that I spend on my cell phone is going to be useful to me when it's over. God, help us to start to build a life that's based on loving the Lord, loving each other. God, give us a vision for our life, the way that would look if we could get a hold of that. God, that we walk through the valley of dry bones and that life begins to happen as a result. Pray in Jesus' name, amen.
Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Lord bless you. Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. Oh, amen. Amen. face towards you and give you peace. God, we're just grateful for your blessings. We ask that your favor would be upon us and 1,000 generations, upon our families and our children. God, we know that your presence goes before us and behind us and beside us. Father, in the morning when we rise, give us Jesus. In our weeping and our rejoicing, give us Jesus. We love you, we worship you. Amen.
Thank you guys for being here with us today.
If you've made it this far, congratulations. We made it through another week together.
No, wait, that's a different one. We're not recording that
Your
one.
mission, should you accept it, is to take everything you heard today and put it into practice.
Yeah. If you guys want to support Shiloh or tithe and all of that, we've got the app Shiloh Ranch Church on any app store, the new website.
Yeah, hey, giving is
shilohranch.com.
rallying again. I feel like people are starting to connect giving with culture, a part of what we do. You know, when you look at what this church gives away, that's part of the DNA. And so just selfishly, man, I'm grateful for the fact that that's starting to kind of catch on again. I know there was sort of a lull when we were trying to figure out direction and things like that coming out of COVID, and man, it's back.
Yeah,
Things
everybody
have been good.
was too. I mean, it was just everybody was scared and pulling back. It's like roots in a drought.
Yeah, we ran out all that STEMI money.
Yeah. So yeah, invite a friend next week. Be excited for some changes and some cool stuff coming for the live stream because it could change.
Yeah, if you get a chance, be here live the last 2 weeks in July. If you can make it, I think the last 2 weeks in July, those are my last 2 weeks as lead pastor. And so I'm excited to kind of get that wrapped up. I'm looking forward to the series of how that winds down. And it'd be nice to see everybody before I go.
Yeah, seriously. That'd be cool. Make it a giant show.
Yeah. Bring rock stars or whatever.
Yeah, or rock stars.
Or rock stars.
Love people around you, and bye for now.